they have been citing, in particular, this one study from where?
Right. So what my feature in The Atlantic focused on was this particular study that was conducted in Arizona, roughly 1,000 schools there, and they compared schools that had mask mandates in place from the beginning of the school year to schools that didn't have mask mandates. And the takeaway finding from the study was that the schools without the mask mandates had 3.5 times more outbreaks than during the study period than the schools with mask mandates. So this was, a really startling statistic, and it's something that was covered widely. It was in every major media outlet in the country, and Rochelle Walensky, the director of the CDC, was on television talking about it. She did mention it multiple times in White House briefings, over and over and over again. You kept hearing this statistic 3.5 times. And that's kind of where I begin my story.
All right. So we have her. She went on, as you point out in your piece, she went on CBS Face the Nation. She went to the White House briefing. She tweeted it out. She went back on TV in October. She was on, this is the soundbite with Chris Hayes of MSNBC in late September. Here is her message.
The big finding is that masks in school work. We've only had in some school districts about 6 weeks of school, and we've already had, in a different study that was published today, over 1,800 schools closed. Nearly a million children have been out of school because of school closures. But the study that you're referring to in Arizona demonstrated that schools that had masks were 3.5 times less likely to have a school outbreak than schools that didn't have masks.
Just to follow up, are we sure that's not a correlation issue and not a causation, which is to say, like, there's higher levels of community transmission in the school districts that are also the ones most inclined to not have a masking policy? See what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, and that's actually been studied as well, and we've examined those correlations for exactly the concern you raise. This is an independent effect of masks.
Wow. Go ahead, David.
I hadn't seen that interview. That is astonishing. The study uses the word association. So unless I misunderstood what she just said, she seemed to be implying that it wasn't merely an association,
right,
but rather something causal. And a number of experts would beg to differ. So, but boy, I'm still kind of taking it in from that interview. I mean, that really exemplifies kind of the broader thesis of my feature and kind of the larger idea that the CDC really has doubled down on, and we see this in a variety of areas, but specifically with masks, the evidence is incredibly shaky. We don't know. I'm not definitively saying they don't work. What I am saying is, it's by me saying from what all the experts I interview are saying, is that the evidence simply does not say what the CDC is suggesting. And again, the language in this study itself, they specifically use the word association. Another one of the big studies, which I had written about before, the authors of that study similarly say, this is not meant to infer causality. So these are important, nuanced words here.
Explain that for those of us who are only paying half attention to this. What are you saying right now?
Okay, so, I mean, basically, many things happen when you're doing a study in the real world, and the magic is being able to tease out what are sort of these confounders or these variables that might be influencing something you're seeing versus what are the actual cause. So that's causal versus just an association. We might see that kids in school have fewer cases of the flu, and they are all wearing masks, the windows are open, and they're running HEPA filters, but they also are all wearing sneakers. And we say, look, by wearing sneakers, that reduces the case incidence of the flu. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's the point that we don't necessarily know what's causal. So that's one element of this, but that's really kind of the tip of the proverbial iceberg regarding this study, which was why I became so fascinated with it and began investigating it.
And she seems to be saying in that soundbite with Chris Hayes, no, the masks, they are the cause. The absence of masks, that's what caused the COVID outbreaks, or in the other alternative, that's what prevented them.
She seemed to be suggesting that. Yeah, I hadn't seen that interview before. I'm going to watch it again after we talk because I'm quite curious about it. But so the main, sort of soundbite is this 3.5 times that she mentioned there, and I linked to a handful of other times where she mentioned it. And the thing is, there's really nothing in this study to support that finding. And I try to methodically run through the reasons why. And now, look, every study can be critiqued, no matter what you publish, and that's appropriate. Other experts in whatever field are going to look at it. And this study is not, removed from that same scenario. What they mention in the study itself is that they did not control for vaccine status of the staff or students.
That's amazing.
That, of course, that has an enormous impact on things. And there's that, and there's a whole other long list of things, Megyn, that they actually, which again, this is normal to have limitations in a study. That is typical, and people can discuss those methodological limitations, and that's fair. To me, what really caught my attention and what I became so engaged with were the things that they didn't disclose in the study. Those are the things that the experts on Twitter and wherever else weren't commenting on because they didn't know.
Mm-hmm. And the first one that you took a look at is, when were the schools open? The schools where the kids wore the masks, when and for how long were they open? And when and for how long were the schools where the kids did wear the masks open?
Right. So the study says it ran from July 15th to August 31st. So any regular person would assume, okay, that means all the schools are being studied for roughly 6 weeks, from July 15th to August 31st. But I started looking at the calendars for some of these schools, and I thought, that's weird. I'm seeing a whole bunch of schools that aren't opening until August. And eventually I ran through, and it turns out almost 90% of the schools weren't even open in July. So how could you say a study went from July 15th to August 31st when close to 85 or 90% didn't even open in the month of July? So this was something that was really worrisome, because what it does is that suggests a robustness that wasn't there. It suggests a certain time frame. We looked at them for this long time frame when actually the time frame was truncated heavily for many of the schools. In addition to
6
that,
weeks, it was more like 4 weeks or 3.5 weeks. Okay, yeah, I got it.
Right. And not only is it in the study, but this is something that Rochelle Walensky mentioned multiple times in her public statements, talking about these schools began in July. One of the authors in an interview to the New York Times talked about, we have this great advantage with our study here in Arizona. The schools are beginning in July. And it just simply was not the case for, 80+% of the schools. It simply wasn't true. And then when you look at the dates, and here's where things begin to get more interesting, is that the schools in the study, you get an indication that the study looked at 2 counties, something called Maricopa County and Pima County. And the schools in Maricopa appear, when you look at the tables in the study, they appeared to be more associated with being the schools, disproportionately those without mask mandates. And when I was looking at these school calendars, I was like, I noticed that also those schools happen to be the ones that appeared to be more often to be opening earlier. So what does that suggest? It suggests that these schools without mask mandates possibly were looked at for a longer period of time, but that seemed not possible. How could they possibly do this in the study? So I emailed with the corresponding author on the study, and I said, hey, I've been looking at the calendars. I know your study says it runs from July 15th to August 31st, but I'm seeing a whole bunch of schools that on their official calendar says they weren't even open until, August 10th. And to my amazement, she did confirm, yes, there are many different start dates. Many of the schools in the study did not run for the full 6 weeks. And ultimately what we found was that there were schools, I think you just mentioned this, Megyn, that were only open for 3 weeks. So we have some schools that are open for 6 and some that are open for 3, double the length of time that they're looking at this. And here's where the kicker is. She did acknowledge to me that the schools without mask mandates were studied for a longer period of time.
Wow.
So I just want that to sink in. This is an invisible thumb on the scale. No one knew about this except me, because I looked at the calendars, but all the media reports, all the stuff just saying, 3.5 times, it's a study. It went for 6 weeks. this is epidemiology 101. You can't compare two different groups looking for the incidence of something, but have one group that you're looking at for a longer period of time. I mean, a fifth grader could understand this concept.